Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video, we're discussing a book called Blood Cruise, written by Mats Strandberg. Here's the book. It is a vampire horror novel. Don't expect a classic vampire story. It's not really. The vampires act a lot like zombies, in my opinion, just the way they move around, the way they act in this book. The book is half build-up, then half attack. So half of it's quite bloody, but the first half isn't. It's more about character build-up, getting to know those characters who need to survive in the second half of the story. The whole book takes place on a ferry going from Sweden to Finland. And the reason for this ferry is that it allows people from Sweden to jump on a ferry, go on a booze cruise, if you like, go to a place on a port somewhere where there's no taxes on alcohol and get duty-free alcohol, and that's why a lot of people use these ferries, apparently. So it takes place on a ferry like that. And on this ferry we have two mysterious people arriving. We also have other characters there, staff, some ex-staff, and just some general public. We get to know a lot about all the characters in the first half of the book. Some are interesting characters, engaging, some not so much. Some are nice characters, some are quite nasty in their personalities. So it's a whole range of characters as well. Male, female, all ages, all different backgrounds. So it makes an interesting bunch. And when you get to the second half of the book, it's that diversity that plays a lot into how these characters interact with each other when they're attacked by the vampires. I did think there may have been too many characters to concentrate on in this book, just too many of them. And they're very short chapters, and in each chapter the POV changes from person to person. And I think that became a bit disjointed. I wanted to see one character for longer in a linear time frame. I didn't want to jump between each character all the time. While I'm not a huge fan of horror novels or thriller novels that have a slow burn part at the start if we're expecting something major to happen through the book, in this book it did work. That slow burn with that character development, but also some things happening in the background. So it wasn't all slow burn. There were some sinister moments and sinister things happening in that first half of the book, and the rest of the characters were unaware of it. That worked well, because suddenly it just jumps into overdrive and gets your blood pumping, so to speak. And all the characters are suddenly just immersed in mayhem, confusion, and there's just blood flying everywhere. There's attacks happening. Nobody knows what to do. So you're just caught up in all that hysterica of these characters, and you're caught up in all their confusion. And that made for really good, impactful scenes in the second half of the book. I thought the author did a great job of character movement in the ferry, of just shuffling, where those characters are in the ferry from here to there. Characters can get lost. Sometimes they know where they are, sometimes they don't. As a reader, you can get lost with them because the ferry is so big. But I think the author did a great job of just keeping track of all those characters, because all their movements, all their actions through the ferries felt so real, so lifelike. I believed everything about that. There were no moments where I just shook my head and thought, this couldn't happen. It's not true. All of it felt so true. While I thought the vampires were written as pretty good villains, there are some things that I didn't like about them. I prefer my vampires with old school vampire tropes. Just how I prefer them, my personal preference. And in this book, they didn't have that. All the old tropes were thrown out the window, and the vampires acted more like zombies. They were in pack behaviour. When they became vampires, they had this blood rage, this rage to kill people and feed straight away. And it just didn't feel the same as other vampire stories I like and I've read. I did enjoy the ending of this book. It does open up possibly for another book, another sequel, but it is an old school kind of horror trope ending. I don't mind that. It is a little bit cheesy, but it's cheesy in a good way. And it kind of rounded off the story in a good way. It's an above average story. It's quite good in parts, really good in some parts. Some parts are a bit mediocre, but I thought the range of characters, the movement in the ferry of all those characters, just how those characters interact with each other, how the author kept track of the whole story and made it feel so real, even though vampires attacking people on a ferry is never going to happen in real life. Everything felt so real and so believable, and I think the author should be congratulated for doing a good job on a vampire horror novel. I just wish that the vampires had more old school tropes in there, because that did ruin the read for me. It is hard to choose which characters to focus on in this section because there are so many of them. We get a bit of history, a bit of focus on some of them. We don't delve really deeply into them all, and they're not all perfect characters. I mean, they're not all well-rounded. Not many of them are, to be honest. They're just there for the story, to drive the story along. And they're very diverse, and I think the author just created these characters with such diversity because it just makes for an interesting read. I'll focus on Cal first. Now, Cal used to work on this ferry. He doesn't anymore, but he's come back to the ferry with his boyfriend Vincent, and he's got a plan to propose to Vincent on the ferry. He does so, and at first Vincent says yes, then he says no. That creates tension between the characters, and they do split up a bit on the ship. And so when all the action starts, they're in different parts of the ferry. And that creates a lot of tension, a lot of suspense in this book, because they're both worried about each other. Cal himself isn't that well-rounded. He's a bit one-dimensional, but we get a bit of history about him because he was an ex-employee. Now he has a different life, so that history rounds him out a little bit, but not completely. I did enjoy his parts in the second half of the novel more, where he's struggling to survive, because it really brings out the strength in the character and makes him feel really lifelike, really real. Lo is a young girl on the ferry with her mother. I think she's almost a teenager in this book, but she's written as being a brat, basically, but it's over the top. I was getting tired of her bratty ways, her one-liners about everything and everyone. That was just over the top and just all the time in your face, and I disengaged from that character a lot. I think this is a sign where an author just hasn't written a child character very well, and a lot of authors can't do it very well. They seem to overindulge in certain aspects, and this makes those characters not lifelike at all. Albin is Lo's cousin. He's also a child character. I think he's a year younger than Lo in the book. He's written better than Lo. You believe him a bit more than you do Lo, and you engage with him a bit more, and he's a bit more endearing. However, he's meant to be a smart child, a very smart child, and I think the author may have missed the boat on this, missed an opportunity to have this character come out of his shell a bit and use his smarts to get out of situations or to try to solve situations and help people when the attack starts happening. So I think there was an opportunity missed, because it could have opened up this character a whole lot more, but instead the character closes off in the book and kind of goes into the shadows a bit. And so Albin, I think, is a character that could have been a beacon in this book a bit and wasn't. I think it was an opportunity missed. Blood Cruise is a good horror novel. For a vampire novel, it does work, but I do prefer my vampires with old school vampire tropes. There is a bit of blood and gore in the second half of the novel, but what I thought was good was the scenes weren't overdone, so there wasn't blood and gore for the hell of it. When it was there, it made sense for the scenes, and it was just done right. I thought there was a lot of suspense, action, and tension in that second half as well. The first half, while it's a build-up, there is a bit of a sinister element going on in the first half, and I think it worked in this book to have that build-up for all the characters, to get to know them and get to know how they're thinking and how they react with each other. So that first half of the book, while it is quite slow, slower than the second half by far, it does work. I rate this a 3 out of 5. It's a decent horror novel, and I think give it a go. If you like vampires, give this a go. It has a slight twist on vampires of old, but it's still a decent book. On my channel, I do review horror novels. If you don't want to miss out on any of those videos, check out my channel and subscribe. There's also a horror playlist on my channel. It should be on your screen now.